Let's take a look at Constitutional Amendment B that is proposed on the that is proposed for the Utah Constitution on the ballot this coming November 2024. Based on the text of it here, sorry, let me share my screen. The Constitutional Amendment B states that, shall the Utah Constitution be amended to increase the limit on the annual distributions from the state school fund to public schools from 4% to 5% of the fund. If you want to understand a little bit about this, the Utah Constitution establishes what's called the state school fund, and it says it's a permanent fund. This means that the money inside it, there's a base or core of money. In accounting terms, they call this the principal that sits in it. And this money gets added to from time to time by proceeds from the sales of all lands granted by the United States to the state for the support of the public elementary and secondary schools. So the U.S. has lands that if they sell them, then they've agreed to give the money to help fund education in Utah. They also get 5% of the net for proceeds from the sales of other United States public lands lying within the state. And then revenues from non-renewable resources on state lands, and revenues from the school trust lands. Those are other lands that can produce a profit, and that profit then goes into this fund for schools. The legislature can also put money in there. If you look at E here, and then any other revenues or assets that get put into it. So if someone donates those or gives those through inheritance. So it states in the Constitution that this school fund, the state school fund, shall be prudently invested here and shall be held by the state in perpetuity. This means the state's not supposed to tap into the money that's in there. They only use earnings received from investments. So they take the money in the fund and they have these earnings, sorry, the interest that's earned or the gains on it may be distributed from the fund. But the Constitution puts a cap on this. It says annual distributions from the permanent state school fund may not exceed, originally it was 4%, and now they're proposing 5% of the fund as calculated as provided by statute. So when understanding this, the state's not pulling 4 or 5% of the core amount that's in there. That's sitting there. And instead what they're looking at doing is to say, let's see, the state is looking to take the interest and earnings so that if you have the core here, that stays. The interest and earnings up here, they could distribute out up to, if the earnings were up to 4% of the total fund. So if, let's say, the fund was worth $100,000, then, and if the fund earned $10,000, so a 10% return, it would only be able to distribute up to 4% of that, because that's what the total would be, or 4% of the total, so $4,000, even though it had made $10,000. And so these, this percent isn't tied necessarily to the increase each year. It's tied to the total amount that sits in there. The reason to put a cap on that is just to make sure that things stay safe, that the fund can exist in perpetuity. I haven't personally run the financials on it to understand if 4% or 5% makes it any more or less risky for losing the principal in it. But in the economy right now, I think the rate of return is decently high. Obviously, in some weaker economies, the rate of return could be lower, but they don't have to take all the money out, all the earnings out, I should say. If they don't want to, they can choose to put some additional in there. But ultimately, this frees up a little extra money for them to put towards education. And so to me, since we have a large fund sitting there, it's kind of like an endowment. The money's sitting there, they're not going to touch the money that originally created the endowment. They're only going to be taking from the earnings, and they want to be able to increase that amount of earnings they can take. So instead of a limit of 4% of the whole endowment, they can take up to 5% of the whole endowment. To me, that's a worthwhile thing. It doesn't raise taxes for us as Utahns and gets more money to education. And so it's one that I plan to vote yes on. I am Austin Hepworth. I'm running for Attorney General in the 2024 election, and I believe that the law should be transparent and open to all Utahns. So thanks for joining me today.